Hello, beautiful, and welcome to Finding Fertility. I'm your host, Monica Cox from FindingFertility.co, and I created this podcast to help get you to start thinking outside of the box and realize that your infertility might have nothing to do with your lady bits. Rooted in functional medicine and personal experience, Finding Fertility is all about looking at the whole body and finding the root cause of your infertility. Finding Fertility does not diagnose, prescribe, or treat any issues of infertility, but what we do is take a holistic approach and improve your diet and your lifestyle to get you steps closer to creating your dream family. Just by being here with me listening to this podcast, you're already going down the right path to making your dreams come true. Let's do this together. Happy Friday, y'all. Welcome back to another episode of Finding Fertility. I'm your host, Monica Cox, and I am incredibly honored that you are here today, becoming the conscious mama you were born to be. Today, we have another amazing podcast discovery call. I know they're always all amazing, but I'm just so honored that I can, one, do these, and another that women are willing to come on and share their stories for you guys to relate to as well. Remember, if you want your own personal discovery call, there is the link down in the show notes, and make sure you are on the email list when I call out for new participants for the podcast discovery calls. So without further ado, let's get to today's episode. Okay, why don't you tell me a little bit about your fertility journey?
So I was always had irregular menstrual cycles, and was actually put on the pill in my mid-20s to help with that because that was the answer they had, and met the man I eventually married when I was in my mid-30s. And so when we were thinking about starting a family, came off of the pill and then started trying on our own. Still had irregular cycles, but it was not a normal pregnancy. The heart finally stopped. It wasn't very strong. Finally stopped around 9 weeks. Had a DNC, and that, even though we did some genetic testing on it, they couldn't find any quote unquote reason for it. Did some fertility treatments thereafter to include 3 IUIs with Clomid, 2 IVF cycles, and that included 1 frozen embryo transfer, all of which failed, and we just didn't get a pregnancy from that. Took a break because that was exhausting, and about 6 months later, I decided to get some functional medicine testing. I just was making some dietary changes, but was actually finding it hard to maintain my weight and was starting to lose a little, which just really wasn't normal. And that turned up that my GI map, I had raging H. pylori, and I didn't know it. So I treated that with an herbal antimicrobial for a month. And about a month later, my period actually came back, which was awesome because I hadn't had it for well over 6 months after our frozen embryo transfer. And then since that time, we just were trying to see if I could reestablish a normal cycle before really kind of either trying on our own or going back to the fertility clinic. And I happened to fall pregnant 2.5 months into that. So I really hadn't even had 3 cycles yet. That one was also abnormal. We had nothing in the sac. And that one I did pass on my own. So we're kind of in the recovery phase of that. And it sounds like one of my doctors is willing to do some thrombophilia testing to look for, any abnormalities there, since we've had now the 2 miscarriages. And I certainly feel like there's still some, healing I need to do. But we, have been on this journey now for family for a little over 3 years, and just trying to kind of think outside the box a little bit. If there's any other areas that I can be sort of dipping into or exploring, and just what led me to you.
Yeah. Oh, bless my heart. You've been through quite a lot in that 3 years. Yeah, that's a lot to go through. So my hat goes off to you to, just still be in a space where you have enough energy to keep going, right? Because it's a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I definitely was very drained after the rounds of IVF. And that's why I really just, kind of put my foot down and said, I just can't do this right now. I honestly, at that point, still had so much grief over our first miscarriage that I got into counseling and was doing that regularly, because I never really sat time, or really kind of the emotional toll that it had taken on me, and how it made me feel about my body and my ability to have, a normal and healthy pregnancy. And so I've come a long way with that. I still think there's some growth I'm doing in that arena, but it's definitely considerably better than it has been in the past.
Yeah. 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 I think a lot of the times, as women, when we maybe don't know the struggle we're about to go into, but have had maybe some warning signs from our body that, things aren't necessarily in harmony, not having a regular period, most of your life, and then being on birth control. These are warning signs, and we're just not taught this. We are not given the proper education to support ourselves. And so what's usually common is that we come to the fertility journey with a lot of baggage, a lot of inflammation, a lot of oxidative stress, a lot of repressed emotions, whatever was going on in the first place to be having irregular periods or thyroid issues or gut issues, or, whatever our thing was. And because we haven't really been taught to take care of those things, we just jump into a fertility journey, and it almost like compacts everything, right? Especially miscarriages, because most of us, when we have a miscarriage, I know when I had my well, no, for me, it wasn't my first miscarriage. It was my first failed IVF my second failed IVF after I felt like I did everything right. I just threw the dummies out the pram, sorry for the expression, but
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
my body can't do this. So when I actually got pregnant, and unfortunately had a miscarriage around 7 weeks, the heartbeat wasn't there. I actually was in a state of mind where I was like, oh my God, my body can do this. Wow. Okay. What can I do to improve my situation even more? And
Sure.
when we're dealing with miscarriages, we, rightly so, we need to honor the heartbreak, and mentally, emotionally, and physically, right? There are definitely ways we need to support ourselves. But if we can put a silver lining on that and say, hey, my body can do this. I know that my body wants to do this for me. Now it's my job to figure out how I can best support it to help it do the things that it wants to do for me.
Yeah.
So that's great that you are seeking support, on that level of just being able to release those emotions. What do you feel? You said you're much better, you're getting there. What would you
Yeah.
say you would want more of, or things would, the kind of the chapter in the book would be finished, or you could close the door on it type of thing? What do you think that you're looking for or needing from that aspect?
Oh, that is such a good question. Let me think about that for a second. I think for me, kind of the big struggle around that has been being able to prioritize myself and being willing, not that I don't know I need to, but being willing to slow down. So around the time that I met my now husband, I was preparing, or I was applying for graduate school, and that was a very stressful 2 years. And then it was, a second career, because it was a career change for me, and there was a lot of adjustment and longer hours and kind of crazy schedules. And so being able to kind of put myself back in the priority seat, and I've definitely made changes that, including more self-care and making sure that during the month I have like time either with my husband or with my friends, like things that kind of bring me joy. But I know that I feel like that particular situation is not ideally optimized. I think I still have the tank more hovering around empty than full. And I just feel like when you're talking about bringing a life into the world, it just is something that comes out of like an abundance. And I don't think that my basket is overflowing quite yet.
Yeah. So that's radical self-honesty. So well done for that one.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of the times we're like, well, we are doing yoga, we are doing acupuncture, we have slowed down from the past, or, my diet is much better than it was. But when things aren't quote unquote working, it's like, okay, well, where can I get real with myself? And am I just doing the actions, or am I actually living the life I know is going to bring me what I want?
Yeah.
Okay. So type A, overdoing,
Yes.
on the go. Has this been since you were a child?
Oh my gosh, so much so. Well, I'm the oldest of two, and I definitely, my dad was in the military, and so he was gone often, and my mom was working. And so I kind of did a lot, not only to kind of care for myself, but also for my younger sister. And then that certainly translated into adulthood too. And most of it wasn't as if anyone was telling me, I expect you to do X, Y, Z. It was literally expectation that I put on myself. So stepping back from that, it's been a hard growth experience, but the priorities are different now. Like if this is going to happen, I have to be willing to, prioritize myself and the family that I would like to, grow. And that's important to me. And so that's kind of that's what I'm trying to remind myself of as I make those like harder day-to-day decisions about what I do with my time.
Yeah, absolutely. I have two things there. The first thing I want to say is you can't type A or overdo your way out of fertility. Like the hard truth is that type of lifestyle has contributed to the fertility issues. The adrenals, the thyroid issues. Obviously, having H. pylori is not a good thing for gut health. And so it's that mindset piece that's so important here, that you have to go, okay, I know that I've achieved anything and everything that I've ever wanted to do in my life, doing it a certain way, by being the go-getter, by taking care of everyone but myself. Now I have to completely do a 180, and that is just it can be difficult because you've just had these programs running for a few decades, right?
Yeah.
So it's being very graceful with yourself and just showing up every day, and being very self-aware of like, okay, was that a good choice for filling my cup? No, it wasn't. So tomorrow I'm going to make this choice. I'm going to set this boundary. I'm going to say no to this. I'm going to, make myself a priority. So once you have that mindset that the old ways aren't going to work for fertility, it's a game changer, because a lot of people stick in that mindset of like,
well, no, this will happen. If I work harder, if I do more, if I put more on my plate, if I do the IVF, if I do these things, it's going to work because that's just how life is. Where
Right.
when you
Yeah.
surrender, that's when, like you said before, energetically, you're making that space for motherhood, because motherhood is really a time, or should be a time, for great surrender, right?
Yeah.
Being present for your babies, feeding your baby, being there for your baby. It shouldn't be a time, and there's no judgment, because this is what I did in
Yeah.
early motherhood too, because I was still type A. I didn't deal with this stuff when my babies came. I was like, oh, I got to get the balls.
Yeah.
Oh, I got to do this. I've got to do this. I've got to make the food, it's like, no, just sit down and relax and be present.
Yeah.
The other thing, when you are in a family who your parents aren't necessarily present for you, um, and the overdoing and the continuous like go, 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 and needing to take care of everyone and everything, is really
Yeah.
trying to, sometimes can be seeking that love and that self-worth out of the things you do.
Oh, for
Um,
sure.
yeah.
Absolutely it is. Yeah. Yeah.
And
For sure.
so, have you done any kind of work with that inner child, or that mindset, or the subconscious beliefs, uh, basically running the show still? Because that's what happens, is that you get this program up until 7 or 8 years old, and then you continuously run it until you make a conscious effort to heal, change, reprogram, whatever word you want to use. Is there anything that you
Sure.
can look at, other than talk therapy? Because talk therapy doesn't really do this for you. It allows you to express and um, acknowledge what's going on. But is there
Right.
anything else you're doing in your life that you think would help?
Helps with that. That's a good question. Yeah, no, right now, like the only, like you mentioned, the talk therapy, they do some like emotional freedom tapping, but that was more just about like, kind of more traumatic or emotional things. And we talked a little bit about the upbringing, but I can't say that we've necessarily delved a lot into that. So yeah, certainly open to suggestions. But yeah, you're right, because it certainly does influence there. I mean, just being recognized, and certainly I can at least pause now and say, wait, is that really the story I want to, really the reaction I want to have? But they are very much deeply ingrained, and it can be hard to shift that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, when we're just keep achieving, and we're not actually looking at ourselves going like, am I achieving this because this is what I really want out of life, or am I doing this because I will get a sense of self-worth out of it, or I'll get praise or approval. So when it comes down to inner child work, it's very much getting quiet with your emotions and allowing them to
Mm-hmm.
be present. And this is something that can be really uncomfortable and difficult for people, especially with
Sure.
parents who weren't necessarily, quote unquote, there for them, like your parents were. It sounds like there for you, always gave you food and a roof over your head and whatnot.
Yeah.
But just like my parents, they were working parents, and they were just
Right.
gone most of the time.
Yeah.
And as a little child, you can't rationalize to yourself like, well, mommy has to work because she has to put food on the table, and daddy has to be gone because that's part of his job. You just
Right.
internalize it that it's all you. So
Yeah.
it's really just getting honest, doing journaling or walking meditations, but getting quiet enough where you allow those kind of moments to become present, and just go, yeah, no, that really hurt when they didn't show up for this part, or that I always had to make my sister dinner, or like whatever it was. Just get
Yeah.
really honest and almost brutal, because I find a lot of people, and I know that I did this myself, I felt like I couldn't complain about anything because I did have parents, right? Like I didn't
Yeah.
have it that bad, and I
Yeah.
don't ever want to compare anyone to anyone, but you do, right? Like I know that I was like, well, my father didn't leave my mother, or, whatever the situation was. And so I felt like I didn't have room to be heard or express those emotions of sadness or anger towards my personal situation. And once you give yourself permission in the sense of like, well, no, that was a little girl. That was my inner self, my little girl, and she did need more. And she did need that support, which I didn't get. So therefore, right now I can sit in a little bit of anger and sadness. And once you get there, then that's where the healing and the forgiveness can come from, of like, okay, I
Sure.
understand now why my parents weren't there. And I accept that, but I'm going to give that nurture and healing to that inner child. And one thing with inner child healing that I don't hear a lot of people talk about is that there'll be many of inner children. Like when I first was
Right.
told about this, I was like, okay, there's going to be one child and I'm just going to heal her. And it's like, oh my gosh, there's like 20 lined up. What is
Yeah.
going on now?
Yeah.
So
I've heard it explained as like parts before too. Like there's different parts of you, which is kind of like what you're explaining, and that makes sense to me. Like I
yes.
can wrap my head around that.
Yeah. And it doesn't all happen in the first 7 years. Yes, you get most of your programming during that, but it can happen up till last week, right? And
Sure.
something traumatic happened to your body. And because your conscious mind was like, oh, that wasn't that bad. But your subconscious, or even maybe a reaction from your inner child, was like, no, that was awful. And we're going to store it.
Yeah.
And we're going to store it
Yeah.
either. This is where you want to look at your pain points in your body, if it's not a physical issue, right? So like gut health, if you have H pylori, you need to get rid of that H pylori.
Right.
But say if your thyroid, because I know you have some thyroid issues,
Yeah, I
if
do.
you
Yeah.
if you have healed your gut, and I will get into a little bit more about what you did with your functional medicine practitioner. But if you have really healed your gut, right? It's working like clockwork. There's no leakiness, there's no inflammation, and you're still having thyroid problems, then you want to definitely hone in on the mental and emotional side of things. You want to
Gotcha.
understand, am I holding emotion in my thyroid from my childhood, from maybe not having a voice, being able not to say what I want to say? Did I grow up in a family that, we weren't allowed to express emotions or speak our minds? And really the upstream of how your thyroid works, right? It all stems from the pituitary, the penile, and the hypothalamus.
Mhm.
So really
Mhm.
getting into that mental and emotional aspect of the thyroid, of like, okay, what is really going on here? It's very rare that you have thyroid issues that are just very specific, like they're coming from the thyroid. It usually stems from somewhere else.
Sure.
Could you pinpoint why you had irregular periods your whole life? Is there anything that comes up? And you don't have to
Yeah.
say on
Yeah.
here, you don't have to say, but I want you to think, if there was something in your childhood before menstruation, or even during those early years, that you can kind of go, oh, with hindsight, this is probably what tipped me over the edge.
Um. Yeah, I would say, I mean, my mother is thin. I was always pretty thin. I was athletic and like ran cross country, and so certainly some of those things could contribute, but I definitely think a lot of it was the stress at home. So, my mom had like some mental illness too that really wasn't diagnosed or treated until I was in high school. So, I think a lot of it could have stemmed from that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean that's a lot for, the eldest daughter to take on.
Yeah.
Um and so that's definitely you're gonna and in your show, I always give show notes to you guys, so I'll email you with lots more places to look and explore. But
Thank you.
definitely going back and fostering your younger child, your teen years and all that, um kind of with of what just came up was almost a great sadness for the loss of something that was still there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah, I don't know. I definitely always felt like I had a very different experience just being like a child in a military family and moving often, and it certainly kind of influences um, how you feel about your identity or how you relate to others. Um, and yeah, I definitely think all of that is kind of wrapped up in the same package. But it was so interesting that when I was in my early 20s and had been looking for help, like, what do I do with this irregular cycle? Like, the answer was, oh, just go on birth control. And that was fine when I wasn't trying for a family, but I certainly don't think taking that for 10 years did my body any good either.
Yeah, unfortunately with birth control, it just hijacks the body, right? And
Yeah.
depending on what the underlying issues are, um well, one, it masks the issues. So an
Sure.
irregular period is absolutely, it's a fifth vital sign, your period. And it is one thing that is just going to be like, hey, I'm not functioning correctly. So there's other things upstream because your period just doesn't work on its own, right? So there's
Right.
upstream things that are out of balance. So usually the period will be one of the first things that will give you a warning sign that, like, I'm not happy. And especially with the thyroid because usually Western medicine doesn't really check the thyroid like it's supposed to, it could go
Mhm.
undetected for a really long time. And it's not until you have like full blown Hashimoto's or hyperthyroidism that they're like, oh, well, your thyroid's out of whack. Where
Right.
because it's all part of the same system, if someone was looking correctly, or if we had this knowledge available to us, which we didn't, right? So we do get a get out of jail free card, and we can give ourselves grace because this information wasn't around. Um, we could have possibly started doing things in our 20s. So our 30s and our 40s weren't as affected, especially in the
Yeah.
fertility category. And this is why most Western medicine doctors think that your age falls off or your fertility falls off a cliff in your 30s and 40s. Well, no, that's not true. We're just not taking care of our cellular health in our from the moment we're born, and especially in our teen years to our 20s, right? In cellular health, when I
Yeah.
say cellular health, I mean every aspect of you, right? Your physical, your mental, your emotional, all that plays a big part in cellular health. Um, so yeah, okay. But that's the past. And the good news is that most things can absolutely be reversed with the right TLC. Um, we haven't really talked about it, but at with your fertility, other than the thyroid issue, is there
Mhm.
anything that has come up in, your medical records that the doctors are concerned about?
No, I mean, like, all the tests that the fertility clinic did, like, everything came back normal. They, like, my tubes are always open. My uterus was fine. Like, I never had any issues with any of my blood work per se. They had us do some like genetic screening testing just to see if, like, my husband and I were both carriers for it was like
Yeah.
125 traits that they have you test for. And like everything really came back fine. And their answer was like, oh, it's, egg and sperm health, and you need, PGT testing to get like a normal embryo, and that will decrease your risk for miscarriage. Which, I mean, I understand where all that's coming from, but it's not helping me get to the point where we can, do this. That we can, like, I feel very confident that we can do this. Like, we can do this on our own, and it's just getting there. That I'm very happy to see the progression, the progress, and I'm so grateful for that. It's just, yeah, kind of the patience and the little adjustments and such along the way, to kind of get us closer.
Yeah. Well, so that's great news, right? You are working with kind of a full house, like there aren't things that are going to stand in our way. Obviously there's sometimes physical issues that are hurdles and that we need to jump over, or use medical assistance for, or it takes longer to quote unquote heal. And then sometimes there's physical issues that, like I said, you need medical assistance for. So that's something to really, like you say, feel confident about. I know sometimes it's really frustrating and we sometimes want those answers so we can fix them. But having a mindset of like, all right, well, we don't have any huge hurdles at the moment. That doesn't mean don't stop testing. I do think that's what medical assistance is there for. Make sure that you're getting the answers, whether the answer is, nope, that's not an issue. At least you know. But from my perspective, before I go into that, on the functional medicine side, what else? So are you feeling confident with your diet? Are you feeling confident with your gut health?
So, I mean, I definitely have felt much better from like a digestion standpoint, and I was able to get to a weight that felt healthier to me. And so that's all been very beneficial. They also did some testing just with like cortisol for adrenal function and such, and no surprise to me, it showed that I just have high internal stress, and like my DHEA levels are naturally low because I'm in more of the fight or flight mode than I should be. And those are changes that you don't necessarily see a lot of like quick change with. With the H. pylori is very obvious. You take the medication, and like literally within days, weeks, like I felt so much better. But some of that, the other stuff is just a little bit of a slower process. They've talked about potentially doing like the vaginal microbiome testing, just to see, because that and the gut can kind of be correlated or related to each other, just to make sure that there's nothing off there. Diet wise, I did do some testing just for like food sensitivities that came back with some of the things that I was eating regularly, like almonds and pistachios and walnuts, bananas. So I have eliminated those, giving it some time and like slowly kind of re-challenging them. I had asked a question about whether or not like a trial of AIP would be the right thing for me, and they certainly felt that at the moment, being less restrictive was probably a better option. But I've certainly toyed around a little bit with that, having the subclinical hypothyroidism, but not per se Hashimoto's or any other like actual like autoimmune flags. So I don't know. I mean, I feel fairly good about it, but nutrition out of all the areas is like the easiest one for me to make changes in. It's the other stuff that's a little more challenging, like the sleep that's a little more challenging, and that sort of thing. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, diet's tangible, right? We do the tangible
Yeah.
things, diet, supplementation, yoga, acupuncture, IVF,
Right.
those are all
Right.
things that we feel we have control over, and they're tangible and quote unquote easy to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, the stress levels, your body's just used to it. It knows no other way, and really
Yeah.
tapping into doing vagus nerve support, really getting out of flight or fight, supporting, I'm losing the word for what I'm trying to say. The nervous system, that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Really calming the nervous system. And because if you're always in a state or flight or fight, even in a meditation or in the yoga class, like there's no point there's like almost
Yeah.
no point of taking the supplementation and going to acupuncture. So really getting tools under your belt to really hyper focus on that area, right?
Hmm.
And what I find clients are most successful in is when they do the subconscious work on top of that, is reprogramming yourself to get that self-love, that self-trust, that worthiness, really healing that inner child. Then you feel more safe. Then you're able to go, okay, sitting and doing this exercise, whatever it is, it could be emotional freedom tapping, it could be meditation, yoga, whatever it is, your body is accepting it more. Your body's like, oh, okay, yeah, we can be here. This is safe, right? Instead of running those loops
Sure.
and those patterns that you've been doing for decades.
Yeah.
Um,
That makes sense.
I'm kind of rejigging a lot of my energetic stuff within the website and all that, because a lot of this has grown massively over the last 6 months, and I just haven't had the time to
Hmm.
catch up with it. But I do at
Sure.
the base level, and I'll send you the blog post, is doing a trauma timeline. I feel like this is really beneficial for people to just kind of really map out their life of like, hey, being a latchkey kid was really
Hmm.
painful for me, like having to show up
Hmm.
and no one being home. Or for me, I was a latchkey kid, but I was also a kid that was put in before and after school, right? I was up at 5:30, 6 a.m. and I didn't really get home till 6 p.m.
Yeah.
And those things are really traumatic for a kid. And then you can start
Hmm.
branching off of there of like, okay, that situation was really painful for me and it was traumatic to me and it's put me in a state of flight or fight. What kind of support can I give myself to rewire this? And that could be emotional freedom tapping. I do a modality called psyche. It could be like you could do neurofeedback, you can do meditations, you can work with the chakras. There's so many different modalities to tap into these things. Sometimes you gotta like experience a few to find one that like you resonate with. But
Yeah.
it's really, in my experience, is finding a coach to get you those places that you're going to be really honest and move through it, and then showing up for yourself on a consistent basis. So whatever that consistent basis looks like for you, right? Some people
Yeah.
need every morning, I need an hour to do these things for myself so I can move through my day in a more centered spot. Other people might just be like, okay, I need 3 times a week. I need to focus on breath work. I want to hit a yoga class and I want to do, even a nightly meditation or something. So it's really
Sure.
finding that sweet spot. But I think it definitely sounds like you're ready to open Pandora's box a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and what I'm getting a sense of too is that there might be, a few physical things that could be improved, but energetically, it does sound like there's just a lot of blocks there. And this is what I'm seeing with most of the discovery calls that I'm getting, is because you guys have worked with functional medicine practitioners, you are doing the physical things, and, not quote unquote seeing the results that you want. And it's just these hidden things that maybe your body's been telling you for a really long time. And just because the society we've grown up in, they're like, no, that's nothing. No, don't worry about that. That's normal. you
Right.
know? How does that feel?
Yeah, no, that sounds pretty spot on.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you like comes to mind or you wanted to ask me?
I guess I really haven't heard about the psyche technique that you mentioned. I know that it's out there, and I know that it's supposed to be fairly user friendly, for lack of a better term, technique. But I don't know if you can speak at all to like your experience. I'm not expecting for you to kind of explain the process, but just like your experience with it, I guess, is my question.
Yeah. So, psyche, what it basically does, it gets you in a whole brain state and is just able, for you to connect with source, with your subconscious, and even with your conscious. And it just puts you, in a whole brain state. So when you're working on changing the emotional outcome to the situation, right? Because that's what
Mm-hmm.
we run off of. It's not actually the situation that puts us in these paralyzed, flight, freeze, fawn states. It's the emotion that we attach to the situation. So it's really getting at that core of that emotion. So just for example, we grew up in parts of my life like on hard times, right? Money wasn't flowing. And I remember a time where we had to go to the church to get food. And that
Yeah.
when I used Psych-K during that, because I was like, oh, well, is that a block? Like, do I look at that situation like, and I did. I like when I emotionally thought about it, I was like, embarrassed and ashamed and fearful. And so when you get into a whole brain state, you can change that emotion. And I just changed that emotion to, oh my God, what abundance that we have in our life, that there's people out there that have enough to give to those who don't have enough at this time. And just looked at that situation in more of an emotional state of abundance and peace instead of embarrassment and fear. So that's basically what Psych-K does for you. And you do that. There's many different techniques, and you just kind of land on which one is best suited for that belief system. But I have found it obviously life-changing. I mean, like you don't really
Yeah.
ever, you don't go into a modality and start practicing it and using it on other people if you think it's okay.
Right.
And I like it more so. I like using a lot of different techniques. I love emotional freedom tapping when I have a situation where I want to scream and shout at the situation, where I
Mm-hmm.
really want to vocally get it out. But Psych-K, it's just, you don't have to go to places in that kind of level. You just get to be just really at peace quite easily. And the cool thing about it is that anyone can do it for themselves, right? Once you learn the technique and do like a weekend's training, you can do it for yourself really easily. And so hopefully it will be a modality that people will just pick up quite easily. Because what I have found with healing is that it's the biggest onion in the world. And once you feel like, oh, I pulled back that layer, and if you're willing and really honest with yourself, you're like, oh, there's another layer. And you get to
Yeah.
just kind of choose when you move through them. And even for little things, you can, just get yourself in a whole brain state and change things pretty quickly for yourself. And then what else I think the modality helps you quickly do is to be very self-aware. So if you get into a situation and you feel those old emotions or you feel triggered, I feel like this modality has allowed me to go, okay, I'm not gonna sit in that. I'm gonna take that and I'm gonna journal around it, and I'm gonna find what that core emotion is, and I'm gonna release it, because I'm just not here for any of that anymore. Right? Like I'm just so ready to move on into the life that I know that all of us should really be living.
That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. And with the subconscious mind and the energetic stuff now is that I truly, truly believe that it's women like yourself who are ready to open Pandora's box and go into places that you don't really want to, but you're willing to for your family. You're not only going to see the success with pregnancy and children, but you're going to see the success in creating the life that you want and becoming the mother or the parent figure that maybe you never felt like you had. And I feel like there's a lot of fear behind motherhood, like a deep fear, when
Sure.
we have had mothers who were not necessarily able to be there for us like we needed or wanted. And the cool thing about this is that you're going to process all that for yourself, and then you're going to be able to show up for your children in such an amazing way. And that's what really sets my soul on fire for you guys.
That's
Yeah.
that's awesome.
If there's any other questions, I'm more than happy to answer them for you.
I can't think of any at the moment.
Okay, no worries. And like I said, you're going to get a bunch of notes and places and things to explore, and really just use your intuition and your discernment, because it can be a little bit overwhelming. I'm not saying you have to do it all, but just this is like, just windows of like, or doors. Which door do I want to walk through next? And really just start exploring that. But I think you've done an amazing, amazing job, and you have been through a lot in the past 3 years. And just make sure you give yourself a lot of credit and a lot of grace.
Well, I really appreciate that, and I am very grateful for your generosity and your time, and your wicked mind.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. I will receive that.
Yeah.
All right, my friends. Well, we'll be in touch, and thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right, you too. Bye.
Thank you once again for tuning in to the Finding Fertility podcast. If you're loving this podcast, please leave us a rating and review and let us know how this podcast is supporting you to get steps closer to creating your dream family. I hope you have a beautiful weekend, and we will see you next Friday for another episode of the Finding Fertility podcast.